Electromagnetic fields, one of the most pernicious threats to your health. How do you fix it? Hi, this is Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today I am joined by Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. Many of you may know who he is, but he happens to be my longtime mentor of the last 2 decades. And I've learned so much information from him. And I'm especially grateful for helping me personally understand that I was delusionally arrogant about my ability and belief to think that I could somehow be immune to being damaged by EMF exposure. And I lectured at one of his events in March of 2017, and he just gave his normal lecture, and he said it in a way that really impacted me, and I finally embraced it and understood it, and it's been my passion now, really the topic of my new book. So welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe. And just for the record, the mentoring has gone both ways with us. You have been as much a mentor to me as I have been for you. Yeah.
Well, the reason you're such an important mentor is you're still in the trenches, and I've not seen patients for 10 years, so there's information that you can only get by treating patients like you do, and the hard reality. This is not book learned knowledge. This is in the trenches, which is the hardest to accumulate and come by. So, thank you for all your hard work, because that's difficult, and you're just not measuring patients objectively or subjectively, but you have these tests that you use, these energetic assessments that are very profound, very sophisticated, and are able to really quickly go in and identify what the real problems of the patients are at the foundational level, not superficial, and certainly usually not drugs.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I respect about you is that you refuse to see new patients, and you still do see new patients, but you refuse to see them if they fail to implement a strategy to lower their EMF exposure. So why don't you start there and tell us how you came to that conclusion and why you made that recommendation?
First of all, I should start saying that when I was 16, 17, I had the blessing of having a fantastic physics teacher involved in the development of the jet engine. Basically, is the inventor of the jet engine. He was never honored for it, but he was a fantastic physicist and got my passion for physics going. And then when I went to medical school, of course, I missed physics. I felt like medicine had gone the wrong way, and so since I graduated from medical school, my attempt was always to combine biochemistry with good biophysics. And so in Germany we were a little bit ahead with that. The work with magnetic fields, the different mats that people buy, that you sleep on that pulsate magnetic fields. The whole Rife technology. Royal Rife was American, but there have been the same developments have been in Germany since the late 1800s. People used pulsed electromagnetic fields for healing purposes. And so in high school, already made aware that the fields created in the home from over high power landlines were dangerous for your health. We were made aware that we shouldn't sleep next to an electric outlet, that we should not have any lights close to our bed or electric alarm clocks. That was already known in the 1960s. So I had that sort of in my back, and then when I came over here for a while, I forgot all of that. And then really based on my work with autistic children, it all came back to life. I was looking at this incredible crisis in autism, and I started treating autistic kids in the late 90s and went to the medical meetings, the biomedical approaches to treat autism, and it was entirely missing in those conferences was the aspect of the electromagnetic fields that the child is in. And so I did a pilot study that never made it into a medical journal, but where we basically, with autistic kids, we went back to the place where the mother was sleeping when she was pregnant with that child. And we found that the average exposure of an autistic child to a non-autistic child was 20-fold higher of the combination of low frequency electromagnetic fields, from the household currents, and the exposure to microwave from the incoming cell phone radiation was a difference of 20 to 1. That means we had families moved, and so we had to actually go back in the study. We have to go back, knock on the home of a stranger and kind of say, well, sorry, can we go in your bedroom and measure the fields that are there? And we had to reconstruct that, actually bring the router that used to be there in the house to the old home. So it was very complicated to do that because it was retrospective, but the numbers stand. And for me, that was confirming for me what teachers had taught me. Wolfgang Maes, he's the man who originated building biology. The whole thing that the Gigahertz Solutions, a company, comes out of that. There's a whole development in Germany.
I didn't know they came out of building biology. Came out of that, or the gigahertz came out of building biology. Did not know that. Makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. No, the man who created Gigahertz Solution himself is neurologically very injured from exposure to electromagnetic fields, and that's how he started a company. But he is working under the umbrella of the building biology, and that's Wolfgang Maes. He is an architect, physicist, genius, and himself struggling with his own health problems, but he's the decisive mind behind it. And so to make this, to sum this up, so we found out with autism that the only proven cause ever of autism, there's different theories, the glyphosate, the acetaminophen, the Tylenol exposure during the pregnancy, the environmental toxins, the Lyme disease theory, which there's many theories of what creates autism, but the only thing that actually was ever measured in numbers to electromagnetic fields that the child was exposed to in a sleeping location where the mother was when she was pregnant with the child. And a study that I've misplaced in my computer shows that microwave, now we're talking about cell phone radiation, the Wi-Fi router inside the house, so that you can measure outside the body of a pregnant mother concentrates 20-fold in the womb where the fetus is. So whatever we're measuring, with the instruments on the outside of the womb is 20 times higher on the inside of the womb. That's published. And so unfortunately, the membranes around the womb have that strange effect in concentrating the ambient electromagnetic field that the mother is in significantly and reaching levels that are not sustainable for human development. And what I really want to say is that I have two kinds of autistic families, or families with autistic kids: the ones that are dramatically improving and the one that are improving. And the difference is the parents that understand the importance of minimizing the exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields, and that in protective measures that we will talk about. But that was for me like a huge breakthrough in my own work, seeing this to be real, that what a huge difference that makes, that we can have generations of brilliant, healthy children if we do not expose them to this, if we protect them from this. And so in China, women have to wear, by government order, protective clothing over the pregnant womb. So when we hear stories that pregnant women are stopped in the street in Beijing by the police, and they're checked if they're wearing their protective clothing to protect the womb. and we know we're very far away from that over here.
Wow.
And so
So that
and
you
so
know for a fact that's going on, and this protective clothing is like silver coated threads that essentially form a Faraday
absolutely
cage that eliminate. Wow,
same
did not know that.
protective clothing that we use here, but it's enforced there by law. We also hear that the strictest rules in terms of the amplitude of cell phone radiation that people are exposed to, the strictest rules are in Russia and in Iran. And we heard, my brother sent this to me, and I have a Russian colleague working with me, a lecture that Putin gave to his assembly, and basically saying we do not need to go to war with America. America is committing collective suicide by the way they're using electricity. And we just have to wait until they're all in the psychiatric hospital. And that was Putin pretty much verbatim translated. And he wants Russia to be Russia again, to be a strong nation again. And so he's doing it differently. He's doing it by limiting the electromagnetic exposures, and knows that it's going to create a whole different crop of children that are going to grow up to be intelligent, to be leaders in the world, to be scientists. And we are a dying nation, basically, because of the way we're fluoridating the water, the way we have adapted the vaccine program, the electrosmog. We created a perfect storm to dumb down a whole nation. And, I'm different from you. I'm here by choice. I came to America because I love this country, and I see it going downhill so quickly. And in spite of the two of us working against it.
Well, we're making progress in some ways, but the title of my new book, the tentative title, and I think the one that's going to make it to publication, is the EMF Extinction. So that echoes your concerns, and the reason that I justify that is that, as you mentioned, we've got autism on the beginning stages, we've got Alzheimer's on the end stages, and we're looking at 50% of the population having each one of those, and in the middle you have fertility impact. It's already down 50% in male fertility. So if you can't reproduce, 50% of the people born are autistic and 50% are demented. How can a species continue to exist? It can't.
Yeah. Let me say two things to this, because you just hit 2 points that are really important. One is the fertility issue. I mentioned that to you in our March meeting. There's a British scientist, Barry Trower, who was the leading scientist for the MI6, and he was the one who had the job to explore what can be done with microwave in terms of affecting people's health. And right now we have the crisis in Cuba, where Cuban embassy members got very ill, and they're suspecting a microwave weapon was used against them. We don't know the truth of that. I think they just got leptospirosis, this common illness in Cuba that people get, but we find out what happens with that. But Barry Trower had to experiment on orphanages, free, an orphanage free for like a monkey to study on. So they explored on orphanages what they can do to make to make them crazy, to make them sleep with different microwave frequencies. And the part was how to make them infertile. And then they took that research to the psychiatric hospitals in England and tried to find out how they could sterilize whole psychiatric populations in order to not do what Hitler did to psychiatrically ill patients in concentration camps and kill them. And so the English had a more noble way of doing that by using microwave. And the frequency that they found that sterilizes people is 2.4 gigahertz. It's the same carrier frequency is now used in all the Western countries to drive the cell phone systems. And of course, now we go to 5G. We don't know really what that will do. There is some research behind it that's going to be even more sinister. So that was that part, just to comment on the fertility issue. And so it's known now, it's estimated that over 2 or 3 generations of exposure, ongoing exposure to the same cell phone radiation that we're using now, we will all be sterile, and we will basically dying out as a species. We're going to become extinct. as your title suggests. The other thing that I wanted to say with this that's really important is this beautiful, beautiful researcher from the Karolinska Institute, Ole Johansson, the key editor of the Journal of Pathophysiology, did a study in Sweden in 2005 where they basically looked at different villages and parts in Sweden that had either high levels of cell phone radiation in the average home or very low levels. And he basically, and then did a map of that of Sweden and the map of where the highest density of Alzheimer's disease is, and found an absolute direct correlation. Where there was the highest exposure, cell phone radiation was the highest incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And before we go on to the next question, right now is that the half of the population that is alive right now will either die with Alzheimer's disease. And Ole Johansson predicted that in 2006, the study came out that he said, if we don't change the course in 10 years, we will have an epidemic of brain-related disorders, which we have. So his predictions have come clear and through, and he is under tremendous pressure now from his own alma mater, from his own university. That's where the Nobel Prize comes from, to resign. The cell phone industry has threatened to withdraw much of the funding to the Karolinska Institute if he stays. And so, but because legally they cannot get rid of him because he's a tenured professor in Sweden, that's for lifetime. But they put tremendous pressure on him to resign. And so that's something you indicated before. The cell phone industry financially is now estimated 5 to 6 times stronger than the industry. And so there's no politician that can make their financial plans without sponsors from the cell phone industry into the equation. And that sort of has meant that there is no, that the science is not translated into public policy.
Yeah, it's the same strategy that the drug companies use. And as you mentioned, the telecommunications has 6 times more funding and there's 6 times more control of the federal regulatory agencies. Yeah. So their strategy is identical. They discredit the people who bring up the truth, they defund them, and then they spin off not 1, not 2, but usually 10 to 20 other studies that they fund themselves that come up with the other opposite conclusion that supports their position. And they say, look, we do all these meta-analysis, and the weight of the evidence shows that these guys were wrong. It's classic tobacco science. And in fact, they hire the same PR firms as the tobacco industry does. But I want to go ahead.
Just one more quick thing to that, so the World Health Organization a couple of years ago, they took all the studies, even though all the junk studies or so, and still concluded that the exposure to cell phone radiation is a potent carcinogen, and put it in the same class as tobacco. And so for me, it's always like kind of funny. You go into Starbucks and it says free Wi-Fi, but no smoking. Or you go into a school, there's no smoking, is not allowed. In fact, you get hung on the next tree if you found smoking in a school, but everywhere there's Wi-Fi. In restaurants, and now we have a movement in Europe now, instead of saying free Wi-Fi, we have hotels now that say Wi-Fi free.
Well, that's okay as long as you provide a wired connection, which I'm happy to do. I crave a wired connection.
Absolutely,
yeah. So it's a big issue. So what I don't want to start ranting and raving and things, but I want to focus on practical solutions that people can have. And one that I didn't fully appreciate, and you mentioned earlier, especially with the ELF exposure to women who were pregnant at night when they were sleeping. So I don't see patients, haven't seen them for 10 years. I mean, I see a few patients, but that's friends or, some celebrity or something. But normally, I don't see patients. So you're in the trenches, you've got the feedback. So it seems from everything I've read that the most potent strategy that you can use is to not have any exposure to electrical fields, that's ELF, extremely low frequencies, about 50 to 60 hertz, depending on where you live, in the bedroom at night. And the only way you can do that, well, there's two ways you can do that. One is to turn off the circuit breaker in your bedroom, unless you live in Chicago or New York, because the building codes there, the greedy unions, that said we've got to put all the electrical wires and conduit, which, so they make more money, but little do they know that remediates the EMF unless you plug in an outlet. So if you live in New York or Chicago, I do is unplug them. You don't have to turn off your electricity. But the good thing to know that too, that that commercial code exists in most hotels, so that when you're in a hotel, all you have to do is unplug every single cord that's plugged into the wall, and you essentially do the same thing as turning off the circuit breaker. So so that's my understanding, but I'm not in the field like you are. So can you give us a clinical perspective on that observation?
Yeah. So of course, I look now through the lens of my patients that are recovering and the ones that don't. So first of all, I want to say the obstacle in getting this information out is the undereducated American male person. We have a lot of people here. We have a lot of patients, from Indian origin or from Russian origin or from other countries. The men are extremely quick in getting the idea that this is a big issue and we need to deal with it. The American male has been the main obstacle in this, and on average, they had like maybe 5 hours of physics in school. Opinions. But I differentiate between daytime technologies and nighttime technologies. The most important time for us for brain health, and let's just put that under that umbrella, the most important time for brain health is the sleeping time. It's in deep sleep that the lymphatic system in the brain works, where acetylcholine builds up in the brain. That's a memory and higher thinking neurotransmitter. And this depends on a very delicate balance of the chemistry in the brain and the electromagnetic fields that the brain is in. And so what we're very, very strong on at night, we do want the house shut off. And this is not just in the bedroom, the circuitry in the bedroom, but for all the house, maybe with the exception of the refrigerator. Or if you live in Tucson or so, you probably have to keep your air conditioning on, which then I would even insist on a separate wiring that doesn't follow the normal circuitry. Electric fields are very funny. You can switch off the electric field in your bedroom and have it on like 2 rooms, and through induction, the field can still jump from one circuitry to the next one. You can still be in a really bad field. We're talking about body voltage. That's sort of what builds up in your system when you're in a field of the low frequency, the 60 hertz field from a household current. And so at nighttime, we want the fuses off, except for your aquarium and your or whatever people may need in serious health conditions. But there is very, very few excuses to not buy a $4 flashlight and do everything you need to do at night with a flashlight.
You can use your cell phone. You already have it. Your cell phone has a light. So that's a battery operated
but
one.
we want the cell phone as far away from people as we can get, though.
If it's in airplane mode, it's pretty mable. I've measured it. As long as it's in airplane mode, you're okay.
No, I know, but
yeah.
But there is that danger of forgetting to turn it on cell phone. Yeah. It's an extra thing. So I like people to actually put their cell phone in a pot in the kitchen, with the pot side upside down, so it's under a Faraday cage. We do have some evidence that your phone can still be found by the Secret Service. If it's on airplane mode, you can still be.
I put mine in a Faraday bag. You can get them on Amazon for like $20.
And that's what I recommend.
Yeah.
But I recommend to do that when you don't need it. So, but in principle, we want the fuses off at night. And if it's possible, you mentioned it before, to spend a few $100 and get a remote switch installed properly, that from bed you can click a button and it switches off the fuses at the fuse box. Number one. Number two, so for the nighttime, the trouble in the US with the poorer population is that you're in an apartment building and you have people below, next to you, above you. And so my first line of advice is move. Possible. If it's not possible, you can create a protective wall against the neighbor simply by using aluminum foil, the sparkly, more shiny side towards the neighbor. And it needs to be, the entire wall needs to be covered. You can also do that with the floor towards the person below you. Foil needs to be earthed, so it needs to be, there needs to be an alligator clip on it. It needs to be conducted into the wall outlet, into the earth, and
that works for ELF and microwaves.
It works beautiful for the microwave, for the cell phone router that the neighbor has.
Sure.
Underneath you, above you, next to you. By earthing it, so for the cell phone radiation, you don't need the earthing, but the earthing is there for the low frequency fields, so the thing doesn't low frequency emitting device. And so this works well. It's a practical solution we often have to do because it costs, like, at best a roll of 2 rolls of aluminum foil and a cable from Radio Shack. So people can do that for less than $20 to protect themselves from the neighbor. By the way, I like to say here that the Wi-Fi router is such a nice, that they're so nice looking piece of equipment, but it is a cell phone tower you're installing inside your home. That has very much the same properties as any cell phone tower. And so most people get the idea that cell phone towers are bad, but actually putting it into your kitchen is really a bad idea.
Well, so can I just comment here, because my observation is that most people are concerned about all, like, their neighbors' Wi-Fi and their cell phone towers, and they don't think that when the reality is almost all of the Wi-Fi, all of that radiation is coming from inside the home that they have total control over.
And it's important to remember from physics that the intensity, the volume of what you're exposed to decreases with the square of the distance. So there is a significant drop. And we have to probably say this, the cell phone itself is the most sensitive measurement instrument that we have. And even if the exposure are absolutely tiny, it will still give you the 3 or 4 bars, so that the actual fact that you have cell phone reception does not reflect the danger zone that you're in. It's the physical closeness to the emitting device, and that's most often it's in your own home. In your own home, you have a cell phone tower in your home if you have a Wi-Fi router. And I would like to say the old Wi-Fi routers you could turn off from the computer. I've now checked a lot of Wi-Fi routers in home. We can no longer do that. So that was on purpose deleted and by many of the manufacturers, that you can no longer switch this thing off. And so we put the Wi-Fi router, if you need to have a router to get the translate whatever comes in into usable internet use. I have a friend here who sews bags, with a Swiss Shield cloth. And so we simply stick the Wi-Fi router in this bag, and then it no longer is emitting anything. So that's called Swiss Shield, and that the website for purposes littletreegroup.com. She sews these little bags, and you stuff the Wi-Fi router in there, and dramatically drops the radiation that comes off it. So I think it's really important for people to know, if it's a cumulative exposure of the low frequency fields that you have from ambient household currents, from the circuitries in the home, and the incoming cell phone radiation, and very often there's also radar from the near airport, or what's worse is the tetra, that's the low frequency, the 400,000 hertz range that the police and fire departments are using, that is devastating, that wavelength, and very, very hard to shield. If somebody lives close to a police station and has gotten health problems, I do recommend to move. These things are very, very hard to shield with any known technology. But in general, for most people, it's their own household current, their own Wi-Fi router, and it's a refusal. We have many teenage kids, they say, I'd much rather let my mother die of breast cancer than switching off the Wi-Fi router at night.
Yeah, that's
Only
just
in
so
America.
sad. Yeah, that's so
I'm
sad.
teaching in many other, yeah, yeah, and it's that's the unwillingness to yield to the actual science. And the same teenager will refuse to look at the science. Somebody say, listen, we have published papers here that can show you that the incidence of breast cancer goes up, brain cancer, whatever you name, and so we can show you all this, but they won't be interested. They say, no, I'd rather let my mom die of her breast cancer than not have access to the Wi-Fi at night. It's a true addiction. We know that the screen addiction is one part of it, but the addiction to they actually have the system vibrated at 2.4 gigahertz.
Well, I want to discuss how it impacts some of the diseases like cancer. But before I do, just finish off on the topic of the radiation in your home. As I was doing my remediation, I was really surprised because I still had this belief that it was all coming from the outside, just the assumption it was my neighbor's Wi-Fi, the cell phone towers, and I couldn't get my radiation down low enough until it finally occurred to me that my cell phone was on. Now, I wasn't talking on it, but it was on. And literally 20 to 30 feet from the cell phone being on gave unhealthy radiation. 30 feet away, I'm talking in the next room, it was still causing a problem. So you got to turn it in airplane mode.
You have, of course, with the technique that I use, the ART, we test everybody on how far, as soon as the cell phone is switched on, how far from the phone is their body going into a stress reaction. And the interesting thing is whether people feel that they're electrosensitive or not, they have the same reaction, and it's just the people that are electrosensitive, they are aware of it. The other ones are not aware of this. The cancer rates are the same rate of neurological diseases, same rates of brain fog, whether you feel like you're electrohypersensitive or you're not. For people to hear.
So how far is it for most people when you test them? How many feet away when you turn the phone on?
About 12 feet.
12 feet? Okay. Yeah. So I think it may be, well, that becomes, I guess, biologically significant, but you can measure the fields like over 20, easy.
Further away, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, what I wanted to find out now, because again, you're in the field, you're seeing this, and you see many patients, sick patients, and a lot of people with cancer, which is pervasive. 1 in 2 people almost are having cancer now. So what is your experience, not in really the contributing factors, I think, well, maybe you can comment on the contributing factor of EMFs, but how different is the response of the patients you're treating once they actually apply the EMF restriction? Do you see a significant response difference?
Yes, it's pretty much, it's almost black and white. When people come back, I see people only every 4 months. And so if people come back after 4 months and there's no improvement, my first question is, well, tell me what you've done to mitigate the electromagnetic fields. I'm not asking them, have you done this and this and this else, and what have you done? The starting difference is if a patient says they're not better, they haven't done it. And the people that are better, they've done it. And to the degree they've done it, that much improved. It's black and white. And we haven't talked about the daytime strategies. I just wanted to give you that. So when somebody is already ill, they have to use the Stetzer filters to decrease the dirty electricity. It's a big deal. We have to check the ground current. That's the magnetic fields created by electricity traveling under the house back to the power station. It's called ground current. That's a big deal, but it shows up as a magnetic field inside the house. We have people
how do you test that? You do
with just you want to measure the magnetic field in the sleeping location.
Okay. So like the gigahertz
All you have to
solutions
do.
NFA 1000 that would do it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
ideally it should be 0.0 volts per meter and less than 0.2 milligauss, or maybe even less than 0.05 milligauss.
And that is, if the sicker the patient is, the more radical the protection needs to be. It's a pretty simple equation. We also have a
Now,
test that
before you
unfortunately.
before you go on, just the dirty electricity. If you, in fact, you are able to turn off the electricity to your bedroom or your house if you need to, and because if you have a really good device, then you may not need to turn it off in your house if you measure it in your bedroom. But assuming you turn it off and there's no electrical fields in there, then dirty electricity is an issue, is it? Because there's nothing to. That's how it gets mediated, through the field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why I call this daytime technology. So meaning
Okay.
during the daytime, when people are depending on having to use the fridge and the TV and the
Mm-hmm.
whatever people, or at work, we need a different set um, of precautions. And so the big one is, the very doable one is the Stetzer filters. Lynn Graham Stetzer is a physicist who won many awards for a simple principle of taking the internet of the electric, so, there's devices now where you can get the whole internet of the electric outlet because it piggybacks on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're in a room,
Which,
your body,
which some people try to do to stop wireless Wi-Fi, so they can use that as a cheap way to wire their house.
that I still think is a better idea.
Okay.
But just to explain what dirty electricity is, through induction, I'm not going to explain the induction, but through induction, you can piggyback every frequency on the electric grid that runs into the house. And one of the things piggybacked on it is the entire internet. So you have billions of phone calls in your electric fields in a home. And if you're in the middle of a room and the field with 60 hertz, but on top of, superimposed on that wavelength, are millions or billions of different frequencies that your cells are listening to with your ears. You can't see it, but your cells are vibrated at that level. And it has biological effects that can be absolutely catastrophic. And so the Stetzer filters are reasonably inexpensive. It's a couple of $100. Well, for the whole house, maybe $2,000, where you can hugely diminish that part. So that's a daytime technology that people can also take to work. We know that the light bulbs, fluorescent, the energy-saving ones that we use, the CFLs, compact fluorescent lights, they're emitting microwave. It's like having every light bulb is like a small cell phone tower emitting those frequencies, which is absolutely devastating to the health of people. So workplace or home, those need to go and they need to be replaced with still of the old light bulbs that were safe. They cost more electricity, but the cost in health that people have by getting the CFLs in there, the cost of health is 1,000,000 times more than what you save in electricity. And so it's a absolutely stupid development. They're mercury vapor based, and there's a whole issue with that, but you have the mercury frequency piggyback on the light that you're sitting under, creating huge health problems for people. Anyway, so
they actually increase your body voltage too. They actually transfer electrical voltage into your body.
Yeah, so
through the air.
Dramatic worsening of the human condition. And then, the LED lights, that will definitely be the future. They are safer. They're not perfect yet. They are safer, but the old light bulbs were fantastic. And so,
and you know what they have? They have near, mid, and far infrared. Most of the energy is not visible light. It's actually infrared, which is why, and infrared is healthy.
Yeah. So, but we're waiting for your book to have all those details in there. So in terms of daytime strategies, and then the Wi-Fi router. Wi-Fi router has to be bagged in a bag that it no longer can emit, and you have to go on broadband, Ethernet, whatever, internet. If you have teenagers in the house, house, you need to provide for them a cabled connection. iPad, iPad has been the most horrible intrusive device in the world because you can only use it on the wireless internet. So if you have an iPad,
it is technologically possible to use an iPad with a wired connection, but you have to have an Apple, 2 Apple adapters, and one of them has to be a USB powered USB connector. So you can do it, but it's really hard, and you have to be plugged into the wall to do it.
oh yeah, thanks.
It's
Yeah, no, thanks for
technically
sharing
possible.
that.
Yeah, but not practical, not
I
pragmatic.
have an old iPad, and I don't remember that it has any access point to put anything else in there, but
No, it's a
I'm
charging
probably
cable.
wrong.
It's a charging cable.
Oh,
There's
I see.
adapters for it, and then you get an adapter for that to go to a USB connector. But the USB connector has to be powered, otherwise it won't work.
Yeah, thank
Very,
you. I think that's a big one.
very cumbersome and not practical.
Okay, let's go back over the daytime technology. So Stetzer filters, the light bulbs are an important issue. In terms of the computer has to be on airplane mode. People forget that. And then the use of the cell phone. Well, of things. So yes, you should text as much as possible. You should, if you should keep it short. There's the Bluetooth system, where basically where the loudspeaker is far away from your brain, and then there is just hollow plastic tubes that guide the sound into your ears. The other headphones are a disaster. They're conducting the field right into your brain. And so, so there's only one system that we know is called the Bluetooth system of headphones. But in general, people should go back and insist on having landlines in their homes and at work and use that as much as possible and only use a cell phone really as an emergency device.
That's what they should be.
Or as a texting.
Yeah, or as a mini computer that in the airplane mode. That's the only time
as a portable mini computer. So the last bit of the daytime strategies is the protective clothing. I know there is lessemf.com is a good website that has all of that, including the full burqa. And I was amazed last time I took a train ride in Germany. Like I said, they're a little bit ahead with that. And on all the trains in Germany, I was Wi-Fi. And it's virtually in every wagon there were like 20 of them. There was at least one person sitting there with a full Wi-Fi protective, full burqa. Slits open, and the rest, this protective cloth draped over them. And I was amazed. And nobody, there's these people walking around in a full burqa. Nobody smiled at them. Nobody made any derogative remarks or jokes or so. So we're still far away from that. I tried that here once on the airplane, and I was asked by the stewardess to give up my dress code. Otherwise, I have to leave the plane. So we're far away from that. But it's devastating for me now that all the inland flights in the US priding themselves of having Wi-Fi for the whole flight. And for me, that's a disaster for our brains.
I've actually measured that on the plane. It's not the levels aren't too high unless you access it with your device. So the moment you log on to Wi-Fi on the plane, it goes up like 10 to 100 times as opposed to just being exposed.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing with the plane is it's a Faraday cage.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't need a lot of radiation in there for everybody to have reception. But I feel it, when I fly to England, which I do every month, I fly on board British Air. Beautiful. I can sleep. I arrive rested. But when I fly from Seattle to New York, which is only 5 hours instead of 9 hours, I'm covered from it because of the Wi-Fi. Okay, but the clothing, there is very attractive T-shirts, there's underwear. That's the minimum I require of my patients with neurological disease. And autistic kids need to wear that 24/7. And that has made a huge difference.
Wouldn't they need something for their head? Don't you want to protect their brain?
Well, I think it's a short-sighted assumption that the radiation that goes in the brain will have its main effect on the brain. The the larger the body surface is that's exposed to Wi-Fi, brain gets. And so by protecting your larger part of the body with the t-shirt, you get more benefits for your brain than when, for example, you wear a cap on your brain.
Interesting.
It's
Interesting.
the body surface that's exposed. That's what is the sick making thing, not whether it's the brain or the chest or the bum that's exposed or the legs.
Yeah, and you brought up another point in a previous interview we did recently on the spore biotics, is that, yeah, we know it affects humans, we know it affects plants and animals and insects, but it also affects our gut microbiome. So if you're covering the belly, then you're limiting exposure of your gut microbiome to these pernicious EMF wavelengths.
Marco Ruggiero published that, and I completely overlooked that until about 2 years ago. And we looked at the science. When you take the entire DNA that's in our body, human DNA is only 2% of that. The DNA is only microbial DNA, and most of the microbes are far more sensitive and damaged by the microwave. And I would say this, and I think it's an important truth. There is no such thing as a pathogen. There is microbes that can behave in symbiotic ways and pathogenic ways. And what determines that is how well our system accepts them and communicates with them, and how the existing microbes in us communicate with new bugs to come in. And we know that the microwave exposure has created the greatest confusion in that part of our system, that the microbes no longer know who they are, who's friend, who is foe. There's a huge level of confusion going on. And the microbes in us feel constantly attacked by the microwave exposure. And when a microbe is attacked, it moves from being a symbiotic bug to become a pathogen. And since we're only 2% of the equation, imagine having 98% of us being our own enemy. We're creating. I know the truth of this. I can't prove it ultimately yet, but it will emerge in the next few years as a very, very cruel thing, that when we looking at the exposure to toxins, we went through this with glyphosate, that we realized that glyphosate is far more damaging to our microbiome than to our own body. But that damage to the microbiome health, that's just how we discovered how important the microbes are for our health, that we are not separate from the microbes that live in us. And now, after glyphosate, now it's the electromagnetic field that have emerged as the main factor that turns symbiotic microbes into aggressive pathogens that are working against us, because they're feeling attacked and they're kind of saying, okay, I'm going to shoot back. So they're turning up their production of biotoxins that was silent before. I think it's important that people hear that this is not just about us, the whole EMF thing. It's also about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a brilliant observation, and that's not obviously apparent and escaped you until just recently.
Yeah. So going back to patients, we know current statistics shows that the most devastating neurological disease, ALS, is now on par in numbers with MS. MS, considered now like a reasonably curable chronic neurological disease that we said, okay, we used to have 20 years to deal with it and fix it, and we took the amalgams out, and there's a whole new ballgame. Most ALS patients die within 2 years of the diagnosis, and I'm having my fair share of them. And we found amazing benefits. For the first time, the first treatment that actually works for ALS is the radical EMF protection. And the same principle is applied to our autistic children, that the most intervention is the radical EMF protection. It's not the biomedical approach, not giving them luteolin and whatever, vitamin C and melatonin, but it is the protection from electromagnetic fields. We know in Parkinson's now So there is a particular kind of microbe in the gut that seems to be responsible, either if it's missing or if it's there, you get Parkinson's. But we've known from other studies, the exposure to organophosphates, pesticides, herbicides plays a huge role. We know there's a link to mercury toxicity and manganese and all that. And says none of that unless you put the patient in an electromagnetic field, a man-made electromagnetic field, then all hell on the patient who will have an inclination of that. And it is dramatic when you see the benefits the people have that most people misunderstand me. So yes, I'm doing all of it, Dr. Klinghardt, and then what we find out, okay, instead of being 3 hours on the cell phone every day, they're now 30 minutes on the cell phone, do the rest with texting. But that's all they heard of our instructions. And so patients that we have need to be, on average, our statistics, instructed 4 times. They need to hear the same talk before they get it or they get out. When they say, okay, I can't do that, when I then get to say, well, sorry, you cannot be my patient because it is so much work for me to treat you. Treat electromagnetic influences in the system with intravenous vitamin C or glutathione. I'm sorry, I can ameliorate the oxidative damage that is causing with all sorts of biochemical interventions, but it's not honest for me and not fulfilling as a physician that we to have these exposures. You come here to my office complaining that you're only slowly getting better. That's sort of what I thrive on.
Yeah, well, I think we need to hear that, and not just patients. I think it's the physicians, even the integrative medical physicians. And was really when you spoke in March, and I heard that, I said, "Gosh, I'm one of those people that not applying this." And any physician, there's just a handful of physicians who understand this, and you're one of them.
Yeah. And you mentioned Marty Paul. Marty Paul is an old friend of mine.
Oh, I did not know that.
No. We've been in a think tank together.
Oh, great! I love that man.
He's brilliant. And one pearl I gained from him. So he talks about the abnormal influx of calcium ions into the cell. Really, when all hell breaks loose, when that happens. Calcium channel blockers are in that, so they can diminish that. The most well-known calcium channel blocker is magnesium. You and your website that turned me onto the idea of magnesium threonate as a special type of magnesium. And I learned from Judy Mikovits. She's one of my main mentors and genetic researchers. She dove deeply into the contribution of retroviruses to chronic illness, virtually in all the chronic illnesses like ALS, MS, autism, Parkinson, cancer. We find with our testing system, when we're stripping all the other things away, the toxic metals, the glyphosate, the Lyme disease, the viral infections, and what we end up with is a plethora of retroviruses. And Judy Mikovits found that magnesium threonate is a fantastic anti-retroviral agent. And so one of the things we use for electrosmog now too, as a calcium channel blocker, we use your magnesium threonate.
Wow.
And
what doses are you using?
Still exploring. I like people to actually go all the way until they get slight diarrhea and then back off from that, to titrate it to bowel tolerance. Yeah. And we always combine it with calcium phosphoricum homeopathic that helps to modulate the channels. We use a 12x of calcium phosphate in general. We test different potencies, but in general it's the 12x that regulates the calcium channel. So thanks to Marty, I want to use that here. Marty is brilliant, and he used his brilliance in many ways. He was the first one who came up with the ALS treatment, with this no cycle supplements that he published many years ago, and he made a huge contribution now with his work on the electromagnetic phenomena.
Yeah.
Joe, I'd like to say something here before we forget it. So, number of special interests that push for devices that help you to protect yourself from electromagnetic fields. And I want to give a study example here that will clarify my strong, it's more than an opinion, it's a knowledge. So, an experiment, 2 chicken coops, both had the same kind of lighting. They have like basically 24/7 light, so they lay eggs all the time, and they're heated, so they're comfortable. And there's a lot of electric systems in the chicken coops. And so, one of them, they cleaned up the electricity by putting devices that are sold on the market to clean up the electricity. This is not the Stetzer filters. These are sort of like ground up crystals and things in it, frequencies and different. So it cleaned up the electricity. And the first, fantastic, the chicken with the cleaned up electricity, they looked happier, they were running around, they laid twice as many eggs as the other group. The other group, chicken cowered in the corner away from the electric outlets and electric instruments that were in there and looked really unhappy. Now, they ran the study for 5 years, and what came out is that the chicken in the group with the cleaned up electricity lived only half the lifespan as the other group. What I want to communicate here very clearly, if people use devices to make them feel good while they're in a devastating illness-producing field, you will get higher cancer rates, you will die earlier than your friends that do not have these devices and feel the discomfort. They have the insomnia at night when the Wi-Fi router is on until they switch it off. And so, your body's response to the fields, keep the response, but protect yourself as that we discussed from it. And this includes the things people hang around their neck. It includes the things, the stickers you put on your phone. You can make much longer phone calls with the stickers on the phone and feel good. You don't get a headache, but you will get the brain cancer from it. On it now longer than before. And so I'm just warning for that. None of the companies had made the due diligence and long-term studies on the safeties of their things. These things are selling wildly. Everybody is promoting them because there's a lot of money to be made, and it creates an illusion of safety. The only safety, when we're dealing with physics, we have to counteract physics with physics. We cannot counteract it.
You've got to avoid the fields or go into some shielding. And we're talking real shielding, Faraday cages. And, you talked about the Swiss shield. I've recently encountered a newer German fabric that's silver coated, 100% silver, 99.997% reduction of microwave radiation. So, we're looking at they're making a sleeping bag for me, and I'm going to pick it up in Chicago next week so that when I travel, I'm protected. So like the burqa you talked about. But, you essentially want to, you're right. The answer is avoidance. It's not these devices.
By the way, there's also Trevor Marshall. I think you may know him. He's a guy who came up with the Marshall Protocol to treat Lyme disease, which I kind of had many disagreements with by using a drug, Benicar, that opens the vitamin D receptor and so forth. But he recently published an observational study giving people just a protective headgear and monitoring their health, and found dramatic improvements in the people's health that were wearing it. And I have to say, his headgear that he designed is absolutely beautiful. It looks gorgeous. So,
wow.
So there is.
It was shielding. It was shielding.
Yes, it was the shielding cloth. He used the Swiss shield for that, but a beautiful design of it. You can Google Trevor Marshall and you find his statements on that and what he's published on that. But I'm glad that somebody caliber is also looking at the electrosmog. I think we're all converging on the same The truth,
Well, we're
it's
not all converging. You are the leader. In my viewpoint, you've been preaching this for a long time, and there's certainly other non-physicians who talk about this, but you're really one of the leaders out there, and I can't thank you enough. And just really very disappointed in myself personally that I didn't fully appreciate this sooner. No, I'm serious. I'm deadly serious. This is a really a topic of life and death for most people, and potentially the
yeah,
extinction of
yeah.
the species if this is not addressed. I mean, it is a very, very serious topic. My last book was focusing on
Yeah.
cancer, but that's just treating the symptoms. It's not treating the cause for the
Maybe
most part.
let me say some more summing up words. All the insiders of our group know that the disappearance of the bees is it's the synergistic effect between the pesticides and herbicides they're exposed to and the electrosmog. Where there's no cell phone radiation, no bees are dying. That not just the bees are dying, but there's a general disappearing of insects, of many, many precious insects, especially the pollinating ones. And we know that the insects that hugely benefit is the ticks. And one of the reasons why ticks are now taking over is because they're very insensitive to the frequencies of cell phone radiation that we're using, where other insects are not. And the devastating thing is what controlled the tick population in the past was the birds. Birds eat ticks, but birds cannot live on ticks alone. They need all the other insects. And so there's been a dramatic disappearance in songbirds and insect-eating birds because there's no more insects. When we go on a meadow now, you don't see the humming and the dense population of insects. You see occasional insects now. There's a dramatic reduction of that, but only where there's exposure to microwave. We have a German footage that shows trees, whole forests dying just because the cell phone power tower was put up. The cell phone radiation, the way it's used right now, is completely against life, and it's compounded by the heavy metals that are in us, especially the aluminum that comes from the sky and from the air we breathe. We know that the glyphosate and atrazine and other herbicides, pesticides, wood preservatives all have a compounding effect of that in our body. And we basically have created a perfect storm that we can still ourselves from by eating organically, by avoiding certain things, certain environments, and especially the main thing where we have the most control over is the physics. We can counteract physics with good physics. And I'm really thrilled that you are have to come on board so strongly. And I can't wait for your book to come out.
I'm going to have to have you write the foreword. I really haven't done that in the past, but I mean, if you're willing to do that, because I think that I mean, you're the person who catalyzed my passion about this. So I mean, it's totally appropriate.
Of course, I would be honored to do that.
All right, well, great. That's good because that would be really good. So yeah, I just can't thank you enough. I mean, for leading the way and really helping not just us and the people who are listening to us, but really leading the way for the field and the species to sort of not sort of, but provide a practical solution, and then having the clinical experience and the feedback to understand that these interventions do make a huge difference, because not many people are doing them, so they wouldn't know.
Yeah. And quite honestly, I mean, I'm my own best doubter, and I had to treat patients for 20 years to see that this is real, and it's devastating what we're doing and the constant increase of the fields. And fortunately, there's others. There's Mark de Havas, there's you on board, and
Well, there'll be more,
there's so
but
many good people now
part of the
coming on board.
problem, and it is with me, is that you cannot see this, you cannot feel it. Most people, unless you're a canary, which is 3% of the population, but you can't feel it. So unless you measure it, you are clueless as to the intensity of the exposure that you have. Which is what turned me around once I started getting the inexpensive meters, and I said, I'm on board. I bought the professional versions just to be really precise about it.
Yeah.
But it's
By the way, I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
there is now for the phones, there is an app that turns your phone into a measuring device,
Oh,
an
really?
ultra sensitive and very accurate device. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the app, but it's
All right.
absolutely fantastic
Well,
because the
you'll
cell
get it
phone
for us. There's someone on your staff
is a
will.
fantastic
Christine will.
device.
Will it measure microwaves?
So,
Is that what it measures? Okay. Microwaves.
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It measures across a wide spectrum of frequencies the intensity, and so you can use it also as a dosimeter. You know, where you have the cell phone in your pocket. Now you have to have it kind of on and walk through your day, and at the end of the day, you can tell how much exposure you had, and it's devastating the numbers people come back with.
Does
I've seen that in England used from some of my friends, and it's absolutely amazing.
does it? But it probably doesn't work if it's in airplane mode. Would be my guess.
No, no, unfortunately
Yeah. So
not.
who's going to want to wear that damn thing if it's? I mean, one of the benefits, Dietrich, you may not realize this, but by keeping your phone in airplane mode all the time, your phone battery at the end of the day will be 95%.
Oh, I know, I know, I know.
You never run out of juice.